All right, and we're now live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the special edition of Codementor Office Hours. This week, we're hosting a series of special office hours in celebration of the Hour of Code. Today, we're very pleased to have Naomi Freeman here with us today. Naomi is a philosophy major and turned Ruby on Rails conference speaker, and she's here to answer any questions that you may have about programming, computer science, and the Hour of Code in general. So let's get started. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in and ask Naomi right away. Laura, do you want to be the first one since we saw you submitting a few questions?
Hi, I'm Laura Dixon, and I run a computer science club for girls in grades 3 through 5. So I'm just kind of interested, Naomi, since you're a philosophy major, when did you start getting into programming? What programs did you start with? Did you attend summer camps that were on programming, or did you just do it in college?
Well, that's really interesting. I didn't realize I was programming, really, when I was a child until I was dating a guy in tech in the past year. And he said, oh, wait, when you were 11, you were using CSS to build monsters on Neopets in 1990 whatever? I was like, yeah. He's like, that's programming. No, that was building monsters. And so we kind of went through my past and realized I had taken a grade 11 computer science course that I was forced into, and I built this robot. In physics, I used those skills to build something for a light-up telescope. But I went into creative writing and philosophy when I was in university, and I absolutely did no coding in university because I was doing that and I was leading volunteer organizations and organizing campus events. It wasn't until I had been in the workforce for a couple of years that I started trying to put pieces together in the hospital to, get automated invitations sent out, to make forms more dynamic, to get things to do things more effectively and more efficiently. And it turned out I was really, really good at all the logic of that. So if I look back, I can say that I was coding at 11 because it was really exciting in this little online world to compete with other kids and make better, more glittery monsters and win stuff like fake currency. But I didn't know I was doing that.
Thank you. That's awesome. I was talking to my girls, and then I'm also working with my second graders for the Hour of Code, and we're talking about algorithms and things. And I was like, don't you guys have games that you don't like games that you wish you could change, like one thing or something? And they're all like, absolutely. I go, then you need to learn computer programming so that you can go in and do that. And so they're very enthusiastic, obviously, this week with the Hour of Code and learning all about those interesting things. And they're starting so young that I really think, the possibilities could be endless for them. So what sort of languages do you think? I'm looking for written languages. Some of our robotics girls at our high school had recommended Python. Is there anything you could recommend?
Yeah, for sure. Something like Python would be good. There's a lot of resources out there. If I can... Oh, I lost my Google window. There it is. I'm wondering if I can send you in this side chat window just a link. And then the other thing that I really like is this Google Made with Code. They always have different projects. And I think that's more important than anything else. It's not about learning a particular language. It's about getting them to figure out the logic of programming. And that's why things like Blockly and Scratchpad are really good, because you're dragging and dropping components and figuring out what a loop is, figuring out how that works in a game. And as soon as you apply it to a project, it's not this abstract thing. It's, oh, well, if I want to change to the next level, then I have to break this loop and move somewhere else, and that makes sense because then my background's going to change. So I don't want my background to be persistent. I want it to now go and do something else. And so they'll really learn it when it's applied to something very specific. So that's what I like about the Made with Code and Scratchpad and Blockly.
Okay, those sound good. We've used Made with Code, but I think you're right. I think it's about what is a loop and talking about that, and rather than write it out 5 times to talk about that. So I appreciate that. And those are really good, easy interfaces for them, and it's more about the thinking for them than the actual you know, just like writing it all, you know, that would be boring to them. So thank
And
you.
the other thing is, in that link that I sent, there's also, I don't know if their Kickstarter has gone through yet, but there's Primo, and it's actually intended for like 4 to 7-year-olds, but it'd be really good for kinesthetic learners because it's like a block, it's a square wooden thing, and you can put quote-unquote programming blocks into this square wooden pad, and it will make a little car go 1 space forward, 1 space left. So it's intended for smaller children and toddlers, but it'd be really good for people who need to get their hands on things, and it's hard for them to like conceptualize just in the computer.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. I see we have a question in the side window here from Casey. I'm not sure if everyone else can see that, but it's just, if you could train someone to go from 0 to a Rails developer in 3 months, what would you have them focus on studying? What resources? So for me, I would say it's a combination of things. The simple answer I'll give you is Treehouse. Treehouse is an online learning platform. It costs $25 to $50 a month, depending on what resources you're accessing. And the reason that I always recommend Treehouse over any other online learning platform is because they contextualize learning. So it's not just about, let's learn Ruby on Rails. It's like, okay, we want to build a platform that is like Facebook. So how do we do that? And in stage 1, they show you how to set up your Ruby on Rails environment. And in stage 2, they show you some CSS and HTML to set up all of the more aesthetic pieces. And then in stage 3, they're teaching you Ruby. And they're really taking you through a whole entire web project. And that's true of Rails. It's true of their iOS, iPhone stuff. It's true of all of their projects. And so then you earn badges, and you can complete whole entire learning journeys. They have great forums there. They're always updating their material. I found that really useful. And I will also add that the way I learned, I was in a programming boot camp 6 days a week, 12 hours a day in a major tech company with a cohort of 20 other people. And so Treehouse was my backup resource. But at the time, nothing made sense in my programming bootcamp to me. It was all abstract. None of it made any sense. And so Treehouse really made it real for me. And I don't know that if you just had Treehouse, if you would have the same learning experience. But I think it would give you the most complete sense of things compared to other things. The next question she has is, which boot camp did I go to? I went to an experimental boot camp that Shopify held out in Ottawa. They only ran it that one time. And I would say be very cautious with boot camps because some of them are looking to make money. Some of them are looking to make a personal brand. And others are really genuinely trying to teach you. So one way you can evaluate that is by looking at what their job rate is at graduation. So how many students got a job at graduation day? How many had a job 3 months out? And then also ask the boot camp what kind of job, because getting a freelance job in a startup ecosystem doing HTML is different than getting hired straight into Google. So you can evaluate their boot camp based on that, because really people who are going through boot camps probably want to go and learn so they can get a job. So that would be the metric I would measure them against. Okay, and then there's another question here. If we'd like to teach young students in junior high school, grades 7 to 9, to learn about code, what are the resources that you'd recommend? Should we teach them real programming languages like JavaScript or game-like resources such as Scratch? I would say both, but start with Scratch because it makes sense. It's an entry point. You can go and remix other people's projects and start to figure out what it is that you want to do. You figure out you want to make a loop, or you figure out you want to make these things, and then you can go and apply it in another language like JavaScript. So if you have, I mean, my core competency is not in teaching and building curriculum, although I'm teaching and building curriculum right now for an online learning company. So whatever the time frame is you think it is, like get a good foundation in Scratch and remixing things and collaborating with one another, learning how to talk about the things you're trying to accomplish, and then moving into whatever programming language is most appropriate. You know, for games it might be JavaScript, for web apps it might be Ruby or Python. Just figuring out what the project goal is and using the right language for that once they've played around with it in a less intense environment. Are there other questions? How can a junior developer contribute to a dev team meaningfully? They can't. That's not their job. No. Basically, a junior dev's job is to be excited, to be curious, to learn the culture, and to learn best practice from people around them. So it's really about being open, being flexible, and absorbing everything you can. If your boss casually mentions a book, go buy that book. Find it online, read the whole book that night. Like, not next month, not next week. Read the book, because they're really helping you out by sort of offering an apprenticeship, and you need to just like absorb everything. And even if it's 3 months in and you're like, you know, this isn't culture for me, then you have that experience and you know that that's a culture that you don't want to be part of, so you can go do something else. Oh, we've got all kinds of questions now. What is my job now? Well, currently I am the lead developer at a co-working space. So the way our co-working space works is that we offer space for other people. We have 4 locations across 2 cities. Well, we just bought another one, so 5 locations across 2 cities. And then we have a core team that does things like community animation and, you know, making sure the pipes are on and building an intranet so that members can find each other online. So I've been helping them upgrade their system there and doing server migrations and pretty much doing sort of full stack development in their environment. But I will be leaving my position at the end of December. I'm getting up and moving to another city and just going to try and find something new to do. And then on the side, I'm teaching this online learning curriculum. I can't mention where yet. I will in future. But it's been a lot of fun, and I've also been, you know, volunteer mentoring for Rails girls and doing a lot of these kind of online one-on-one teaching, and I think I want to move more into a role where I can teach, where I can mentor, where I can do developer advocacy and kind of, you know, talk about the big projects and the vision and things like that. What else do we have here? Should young students learn web programming first or mobile programming? Students like to play iOS games, and mobile programming may be more interesting. Yeah, absolutely. The other great thing about iOS is that the way you program it, you go into this tool, this GUI, this interface called Xcode, and there's actually a storyboard.main. Like, there's a storyboard where people can drag and drop stuff on. You do need some programming to support it, but there are a lot of things you can do non-programmatically. In addition to that, now with Swift, it's complex in the back end, but basically you can use emoticons as variables. Now, I will say, real computer scientists will freak out if you use emoticons as variables. My mentor freaked out when I tweeted about it. Everyone's freaking out. Don't do this in real life if you're programming. But for students, I feel like there's a real opportunity in Swift to take a little ghost emoticon and make that the variable that is the ghost player that is moving through your game. I mean, I haven't tested this theory, but I've played with it a little myself, and I think it could be really cool. So I think just whatever it is that they want to learn, if it's games, then do iOS or JavaScript. If it's more, they want to start a blog, they want to start a little photo uploader site, you know, you probably want to do Ruby on Rails for that.
Hi Naomi, just to ask a follow-up questions on this. There's a belief that iOS programming is relatively more challenging than, say, a Ruby on Rails. So would the learning curve be a little bit too high for a beginners in junior high to learn, say, Objective-C, or would you think that Swift is a lot easier for the kids to learn now?
I think Swift, I want to be careful with my language here because I'm not an expert in the mobile stuff, but Swift sort of hides a lot more of the things that are close to C and more basic languages than Objective-C did. And the other thing is for us as adults, it is really difficult to stop being an administrative assistant and just like program for 60 hours. But for a student, I mean, we teach them everything from like in some schools Latin and Japanese to French to algebra to who knows what. Everything is random and everything is difficult and abstract and new and strange for them. So I don't really see that there's any more of a challenge doing one or the other. I mean, Ruby seems really simple on the surface, but when you get into Ruby on Rails, the full framework, what you have is a whole bunch of senior devs who have come into this magic language that abstracts away a lot of things, and they're constantly pulling in other languages and other things into the project. So you've got a lot of JavaScript going on, you've got a lot of Ajax calls, you've got all sorts of things as soon as you open the doors a little bit more. And so I don't see that the learning curve would be any better or worse one way or the other.
Right. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, Casey has a question.
Okay, so this question is, could you suggest a website CMS for a new developer to showcase their projects? Squarespace, WordPress. I'm looking for a plug and play, anything to avoid. Well, what I'm using is Squarespace, but that's because I'm not just doing web projects. I wanted to show off a whole entire range of things that I have accomplished, from organizing hackathons to contributing to open source code of conduct to projects. And so I set mine up kind of like a gallery of like, here's a whole bunch of things I can do. In terms of, just showing off your projects, one of the most quote unquote impressive or industry standard things you can do is set up a page from GitHub and use some of the liquid templates to set up and host your own site from your GitHub. And then people will know that you know how to use GitHub, that you know sort of what industry standards are, that you know how to play with markup a little bit, and that you've taken ownership and control of this website. The reason that I moved away from it is that my goal was not so much to show off my skills in programming anymore, but to get a blog launched so I could start talking about stuff I was doing. And I was getting so caught up in, oh, but how do I change this header? Or how do I inject a whatever? It was becoming a learning web project for me to be in GitHub. So that was just, that was a challenge for me in the way that I learn and operate. And it was getting in the way of me accomplishing the actual goal of launching a blog. Where else have I seen people do them? If you're in Rails, you can also completely customize your own and push it to Heroku. And I mean, at that point, the possibilities are endless. You don't have any of this liquid markup problem, this and that. Your problem will possibly be switching your databases from whatever the basic configuration is into Postgres. Heroku does have some documentation, but between Heroku and Postgres, they don't always have all of the documentation. Yes, I'm on Twitter. I am at Naomi_Freeman. Personally, I am not down with the WordPress. It is one of my least favorite things in the world. Sorry, WordPress. I would take Drupal over WordPress, and I am not a fan of Drupal either. What else is out there? The other thing is like about.me now has this backstory page. I haven't really explored it, but it might be a possibility. But yeah, I would stay with more GitHub, Heroku, those sorts of things. But I can't really not advocate for Squarespace because I'm using it. Anything else? What would you say to encourage more girls to learn how to code? Yesterday, I did a 10-minute session with an auditorium of 9-year-olds via Hangout, and I just said, well, I mean, you wouldn't leave it to boys to match everyone's socks and their pants in the world, would you? So why would you leave the internet to them? And that really got them going. But for younger girls, I think it's just about really making it applicable and making it things that they want to do. Like I said, I was programming before I knew I was programming because I wanted to put glitter on stuff, because I wanted to, I don't know, build a little robot. For older adults and mid-career folks, I guess it's more complex because these ideas of gender and power and all of that comes into it, and it is difficult, to navigate. But really, the only way that women are going to be in the space is for women to get in the space. So women have to go be in the space. And I mean, that's a hard thing to advocate for. And I do that, and for sure, it's a little challenging, because I'll go into a Ruby hack night at one of these big dev companies in Toronto, and it's going to be 53 guys plus me, and therefore I'm suddenly the singular representation of how women can program, how all women ever program, and that's a lot of pressure, especially when you're having an off night, or you're in out of your depth, and you better be in out of your depth sometimes, because how else are you going to learn? But it can be very intimidating. And all I can say is that, you know, for every jerk loser out there, there's 2 guys that are in your corner who may not be standing up and advocating, but are more than open to pair with you. They're willing to answer your questions. There's good guys out there. There's a lot of good guys out there. I wouldn't be a programmer without guys, because all of my mentors, teachers, and persons who got me here were male, so I'm not sure what else to say about that. If you have more questions, I'll answer them. Thanks, Laura. Laura's just thanking me for advocating and staying in this industry. Thank all of you for, you know, being here and checking this out and having these conversations. It's really important.
Thank you, Naomi. Casey also had follow-up questions about how would you encourage older adults or mid-career folks to start learning how to code?
Right. I think consider why it is that you want to code. So I think everybody needs to learn how to program, because the whole entire world is programming now. Whether you're getting boarding passes for a plane or you're buying shoes, all of those things involved computers at some point or other. And so I think it's absolutely essential that we all have some programming skills. But I think there's kind of this this mismatch. I don't know what the word is for it right now, but these boot camps, for example, will sell to you that in 12 weeks you will be a computer engineer that can do anything. And that's not always true. Sometimes it's true, but it's not always true. And just because you're not an engineer after 12 weeks doesn't mean that you're not an engineer. But I don't think that everyone should give up their career and go be a full computer engineer programmer. I think there's a lot of room for people to have programming skills and be contributing to their own projects and making their own work much better in their industry. I think there's a place for that beside and along with computer engineers. We have another question. I'm looking for some sort of a guide or checklist to help me work from foundational skills as I'm starting to learn to code. Do you happen to have any resources that might help? Foundational skills learning to code. I mean, for sure you need some HTML and some CSS, but I mean, there's more things to coding than coding. And so I always advocate, for example, going to a hackathon, which is like you're together with a whole bunch of designers and devs and other people for 48 to 72 hours. You intensely collaborate on a project, either a civic one that's been designed by certain people in the industry, or, just to make cool tech. And what that does is it exposes you to workflows and to learning on the fly and to collaborating with other devs and learning from other devs, because being a dev is not just about knowing a language. It's also about being able to pair with someone and learn from someone and read documentation and be in the kinds of environments that, sometimes they buy billion-dollar companies in 24 to 48 hours, right? This is not always the case, but it's a very different place to exist than for me working in a hospital, or, from working in a library or something else. So there's a lot of, quote-unquote soft skills that also need to go along with it. Non-existent skills, okay. I'm in Oklahoma. Hackathons might actually be rarer than Bigfoot here. There are some hackathons that you can contribute to online. It's not the same feeling, but I have helped coach a hackathon that was in the Yukon in health apps, which was a really interesting thing. We had to use a lot of tools to collaborate, but it is possible. And Codementor is always here to help people if you need one-on-one coaching. Foundational really start with HTML. And again, I'll go back to recommending Treehouse because they have learning pathways for every single level of skill that you need. They even have like business training, how to do an interview, those sorts of things. And Codementor has resources. Good to know. Yes, that's a good point. Casey says to try Meetup. There's lots of meetups. There are all kinds of different levels. It's fun to go and check them out and see what's what. Some of them will be more about more talking. Some of them will be more networking. Some of them will be actual building stuff. But there's a lot of different meetups you can try. Does anyone else have resources that they found were really helpful for foundational learning? No? Do we have any other questions? So we have some suggestions coming up in the side for kids, Made with Code, code.org, Scratch, Hopscotch. Casey recommends Odin Project, Code Academy, Code School. One sec. So there's also recommendations for Linda for design. And Codementor is asking if Code Academy has resources for kids as well. And in response to that, Laura says, kids can start to learn HTML at Code Academy. And some other recommendations are Code Combat for Python, Skill Crush. Someone's talking about SitePoint, which I'm not familiar with, but
speaking of Python, Naomi, what do you think about like what's the language that beginners should learn? I guess there's always the argument of Python versus JavaScript versus Ruby on Rails versus PHP and more.
yes. Well, I mean, at the very, very beginning, everyone has to learn HTML. You must learn HTML. You must learn a little bit of CSS. But beyond that, I think that answer just depends on what you're trying to achieve. I don't think there's any merit in learning a simpler language that isn't going to move you towards a goal that makes sense for you. One thing I found is once I was done my boot camp and once I had worked through a project with Treehouse, I was also taking online hard computer science courses through Harvard and Berkeley through their massive open online course system. And some of that introduces Java and algorithms, and those are important to get an interview. So in an interview, you'll be asked about C and Java pointers, algorithms and parsing and all kinds of things, even when you're applying as a junior Ruby dev. This is just a paradigm thing that's happening in the industry right now. I hope they shift soon. Because a Ruby dev at this point does not need to know those things if you have an infrastructure engineer backing them up doing that stuff. So if your goal is simply to get a job, maybe you should learn Java and get them to teach you the language on the ground. If you, like I was saying earlier, like for games and things, JavaScript, iOS, for other stuff on the web, there's different languages. I think people come to Python a lot because it's really simple. It's simple in terms of it's very much like English. But I think like I've gotten by okay without Python, and I can understand why people use Python. But I don't think there's one right answer for everyone in terms of which language they should learn first, which is maybe frustrating. But I don't think it's true that we all have the same pathway through this. Again, because I don't think the goal for everyone is to become a computer engineer at Google. I think there's a lot of different ways we can use programming and be very effective. Use the right tool for the job. Oh, Laura's just heading out now. It was great to talk to you too. I hope you enjoyed the chat. I'm going to answer this question of big time waster when learning. And I think, how do I say this? I think you can be in a rabbit hole and be very isolated on your own. And I think you have to always be thinking about, how do I publish this project? And there's this kind of saying that, you know, if you publish it when you feel ready and good about it, you probably published it too late. So I think the biggest time waster when you're learning is just trying to create a Michelangelo masterpiece out of your app. I was building this Facebook-like app for months and months and months. I went on for like 8.5 months building this thing. And finally, one of my mentors, I had called him. He's in Ottawa, so I Skyped him and I said, "Oh, well, now I'm just trying to fix the email list serve thing on this because I want to do these push notifications." And he said to me, "When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail." So you're just trying to put every single component, every single thing that you've ever learned into this app, and it's not going to be helpful. What's going to be helpful is publishing the app as it is, showing it as a portfolio project, getting some feedback from other devs, and putting those components in a completely new app where you only think about those components and not about all these other basic things that you've already learned. So the biggest time waster is just, continuously reworking and reworking and reworking a project when you could just be making lots of little projects instead, which will accelerate your learning and also stop you from going crazy, being locked up in a room by yourself. Just watching this side panel to see if more questions come up.
Do we have any more questions for Naomi? If not, we can always end the session a little bit earlier. So Naomi, do you have any final words for young girls and young kids learning how to code and people who are hosting the Hour of Code this week?
Just do it. Just do the thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, we talk about all these challenges and stuff because as people, we want to know, like, what do we watch out for? What's scary? Where are we going to break? But I mean, there's so much fun to be had in code, and it's so exciting and fulfilling when you click a couple more buttons, and then all of a sudden the thing that you imagined in your head is on a screen, and you can send it to someone, and you can share it, and you can pass it on, and you're like, yes! And you can pass on your knowledge. You're like, oh man, all I did was change this little quotation mark into this other thing, and then the whole thing worked, and now I can tell you that, and you can know that. So just have fun with it. And the same advice to people running Hour of Code this week. I was really scared to get on video in front of a whole bunch of little 9-year-olds in an auditorium. I was absolutely terrified, but they're so much fun. Smile, make gestures with your hands, and they'll be super excited. So just go try stuff and have fun, and it's hard to break things, and you'll learn something new, right?
That's super interesting. Can you talk a little bit about your experience doing the live session with a group of 9-year-olds?
Well, I mentioned to my friend that, I forgot that they have no context for the world at all. So a little girl was like, do you think girls can code? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think girls might be better at coding because my context is that there is one woman in tech and a whole bunch of guys. But then some little boy was like, but can boys code? And he hasn't really experienced these privileges. He hasn't been in an imbalanced workplace. He hasn't, had all of that. And for him, it's a genuine concern that maybe boys can't code. And I was like, oh, goodness. I'm so sorry. So just keeping that in mind that, they really don't know anything. But they're also a lot of fun, and they have some really cool questions. And they're just really excited to learn new things. They're excited to learn about what you do and how you do it. And it's really important to keep it really concrete. Because I can say, oh, I work at the Center for Social Innovation, putting people and planet first, and that doesn't mean anything to them. What means something for them is to turn my laptop around and show them what a co-working space looks like and how cool it is, and say, I help people build forms so they can get money to save pandas. And that makes sense to them. They know what a panda is, and they know what getting money is, kind of. So just keeping it really concrete, for sure. Thanks, Ria.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Naomi, do you have any final thoughts to share?
No, just thanks so much for being here and for chatting. I know we've lost a couple of people just because the time's wrapping up, but I really enjoy doing this stuff. It's really good to talk with you guys.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. If you have any other questions, feel free to ping us or Naomi on Twitter or on Codementor as well. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Naomi.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.